There was happiness. There was love.
Of what do you speak? From where have you learned such things?
I have read. I have read from this book. I discovered it and kept it hidden. Somehow it survived the flames of the annihilators when our people were turned into mechanized slaves centuries ago.
When we return to our planet, the High Court may well sentence you to torture.
Hello and welcome to every single sci-fi film ever. I'm Aisha Khan. Today we'll be speaking about a film that is definitely not for some people. You're not going to wonder at the mastery of writing or the gravitas of acting, but after last episode's very grim On the Beach, I'm grateful today to focus on a title that some may class as a bad film. Teenagers from Outer Space from 1959 is full of cliches. It is low budget and cheesy, but in its defence, it has 1, a coherent plot, 2, is charmingly funny, even if it perhaps doesn't mean to be, and was made on a micro budget by a man called Tom Graeff, who was writing, editing, producing, starring in, and directing. It's been absolutely delightful to not think about the state of the world or impending doom of apocalypse, and just to wonder about how fun it would be if I got to be involved in an alien invasion adventure with giant lobsters, rayguns, and cool 1950s cars. To put the film into a bit of cinematic context, I will share a few of the films from the year prior in 1958. The top grossing film of 1958 was South Pacific, which I have not seen because it is a romantic musical and it takes me a lot to watch one of those. But also from 1958, there is the amazing Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Indiscreet, Vertigo, The Defiant Ones, The Long Hot Summer, and Houseboat, all of which I have watched. And with that, on to my wonderful guests. Mark Longenecker is Associate Professor of the Practice of Film Studies at Wesleyan University. Welcome back to the show, Mark. How are you doing?
Doing great.
Wonderful. And joining Mark, we have Blair Davis, who is a Professor of Media and Cinema Studies at DePaul University. He has written a lot about cinema and comics, including the book The Battle for the Bees, 1950s Hollywood and the Rebirth of Low-Budget Cinema. Welcome to the show, Blair. How are you?
Thanks, I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you so much. First of all, Mark, I asked you which films you wanted to cover, and this was near the top of your list, so I want an explanation as to why.
Oh, I see. I enjoy this movie. I think it's got enough memorable elements in it, which is, I think, allowed its, I don't want to call it popularity, but perhaps notoriety, ongoing memory to endure. The spaceship that screws itself into the ground, the bizarre kind of lobster as giant monster, it has charm, and yet it's also like, it is a bad movie, but it's also kind of not a bad movie at the same time. It's one of the more tolerable to sit through of this era, I find, and I honestly would even put that up against some of the weaker studio product of this time, and in a weirdly heartwarming way.
Mark. Examples.
Yeah, I'm just saying this is oddly enough a kind of like charming, if bittersweet, story of like independent filmmaking and gumption, and in some ways is kind of more accessible to like budding young filmmakers now than whatever Day the Earth Stood Still or something like that.
Okay, interesting. Carry on. You were about to add more things.
Like I said, one of the things I like about this is, he's got no money. He's actually making good decisions for having no money. We've already been kind of talking before recording about the fact that he pre-recorded the dialogue and then
this is Tom Graeff. We may be pronouncing it wrong.
I actually kind of think he's not a bad filmmaker. One of the reviewers said if he just stops taking on too much, he might actually have a career, which I think could have been true, but for some other extenuating circumstances. But I don't know. It has for me this kind of mixture between, what we often call the so bad it's good charm, but also, if you kind of look under the surface, has some, there's actually some smart decision making and some competence here. And then if you look under that surface, it's actually something kind of sad and alarming.
Okay. And Blair, you're quite fond of this film as well. Can you tell me your personal experiences with it? When did you first see it?
I first probably came across it on Mystery Science Theater 3000 and enjoyed it so much that I commissioned my own homemade, custom-made Teenagers from Outer Space t-shirt, which I am currently wearing right now. Many years ago, I believe my wife made it for me because it really embodies on the surface the most highly exploitable aspects of 1950s low-budget B-movie filmmaking. And the reviews talk about that for as bad as some of the reviews are, they all praise the fact that this is highly exploitable for the exhibitors to try and make a buck off of this, and it falls right at the end of the mini wave of teenage independent cinema, like I Was a Teenage Werewolf and Teenage Frankenstein, which he was trying to cash in on and kind of just missed the tail end, which we'll talk about a bit. But it is at the same time as you can laugh at it for being so bad it's good. It is really a triumph of go out and make your own movie on your own terms, which I absolutely love. And having written about a lot of really cheap B movies over the years, this is one of the more competent ones for this budget range of between $10,000 and $20,000, which was cheap for the time in the 1930s when they were making Poverty Row westerns. That was the bottom of the barrel budget, and this is some 25 years later, he's still working with this type of budget. But he wanted to make a movie. He gathered up the funds, and two of the actors who are in the film are the ones that put up the money, which is the way Ed Wood would do it as well. And so he decided he wanted to make a film, and it is far more watchable and far more competently made, as Mark points out, than many of the other films which were very cynically made at this time. And I point in particular to my least favorite director of all time from this era, B-movie director, producer, Jerry Warren, who made some horribly cynical films in which he has outright stated, I didn't care what I was doing. I didn't care about the audience. I just wanted to make the buck. And he made a film in 1958, I believe, called Teenage Zombies, which is not watchable, whereas Teenagers from Outer Space is highly watchable. And my kids, when we were rewatching the film, they're coming across it. What are you watching, Dad? And they're there. They're into it for a few minutes. And this is faint praise, but it's praise nonetheless. They said, well, it's not terrible. And I agree. I mean, for some preteens coming across this movie some 60 years later, it's not terrible is faint praise. So I like that aspect. I really respect Graeff saying, I want to make this movie. I want to make it on my own terms. I'm going to do everything I have to do to get it made, down to some of the production choices that we'll talk about. And I think some of the best B movies that get made are examples of what I have started to call working class cinema. And it's this idea that I want to make a film outside of the studio confines any way that I can and try and get it distributed by some kind of major studio. And this is Graeff in the trenches, making it with his heart on his sleeve. And I, for one, I respect the hustle.
It's interesting because it says that the review said he should get more people to help him, but I don't think on that budget he possibly could. Like, it sounds like such a privileged thing to say. It's like, oh, you should have just got a whole team and got your dolly grip and everything, and it would have been fine. But like, obviously, you're working within a budget. How did something like this get distributed by Warner Brothers?
So this was a common pattern in the 1950s, whereby you've got the end of what's called block booking in Hollywood, whereby theaters no longer have to buy entire packages of films from a particular studio or distributor. They can pick and choose what they want to purchase now. And so with that, all of a sudden, the major studios started to shop around for independently made films, and were picking up films that usually had already been made to then distribute and make their buck off of the back end, rather than putting their money into making the project. They took their money in distributing it to theaters. And so there were a lot of B movies in this period in the mid to late 1950s that were being bought up by major studios. The Blob is another one, for example, that was picked up and became a massive hit that Tom Graeff could only aspire to. And so it was originally, Graeff was trying to make a deal with the more independent studio Allied Artists, which used to be Monogram Pictures, a B-movie studio. And they went a little bit more higher end by the 50s with Allied Artists. And they had almost reached a deal, apparently. And then, well, we can get into it, but the deal seemed to have fallen through. And then Graeff was still shopping around and took a lesser deal with Warner Brothers to sort of take what he could get to get the film out. And it played on the bottom half of a double bill with a film called Gigantus, the Fire Monster, aka Godzilla, Raids Again. And this is simply a case of a major studio wanting to pad out a double bill for exhibitors and picking up a film on the cheap that had already been made and was being shopped around, which was common for the major studios to do in this particular time in Hollywood.
Mark, the reason it wasn't successful, even on such a low budget, do you think there was issues with the studios there, or do you think it just was the point where there was such a saturation of this kind of film that it simply didn't get a look in?
I think both things. I mean, as Blair was saying, there's even if the movie has an independent film idealism coming from its creator, it is met with a great deal of cynicism by the film industry. So, this is a piece of product, not something that, Warner's has a ton of faith in. I mean, as you pointed out, it's like there's like a dubbed and recut Godzilla movie on the same bill with it. I mean, it's product plus product equals maybe people will come to this. As Variety points out at the time, I mean, they are actually already calling attention to the kind of so bad it's good quality of it, even on its original release, saying that I like this. The film is impudently grandiose in its tone and more likely to elicit shrieks of amusement than horror. So it's kind of saying, look, the teenagers are going to go to this and laugh at this thing. The only people who are going to, it's strictly for the juvenile market. The only people who are going to go see this are teenagers looking for this kind of activity. I don't think there's any like big secret for why this thing doesn't cross over. What's more miraculous is that it kind of like continues to endure in this bizarre quasi-secret handshake, or at least kind of like among the, kind of nostalgic oddballs who remember these movies. It has something of a place of honor, which is maybe better than anything of that kind of budget and that origin could have aspired to in the end.
It ticks all the boxes, right? And there is something really charming and funny about it. And I don't think it was intentional, but there is, and I think perhaps both of you have mentioned this when I spoke to you, there is a sincerity to the film. There's no kind of cynical, I'm out there to tick all the boxes and get the money. It feels like a genuine, like quite heartwarming story. Blair, can we talk a bit about the concept of bad film? Because you've spoken about this a lot and we want you to talk about it again.
So the idea of the bad film is almost a critical, or in some circles, an academic theoretical rereading of a group of films that certainly just were made as products, as Mark has pointed out, that these were movies made within a particular economic system in Hollywood in which there was room to make a product, usually for a modest budget, and there was for a long time a guaranteed market for it. And then by the 1950s, once the system changed, block booking, as we mentioned, as a form of distribution, was legally done away with. There was an antitrust lawsuit, and it opened up a lot of room in the marketplace for independent producers to all of a sudden have access to the major movie theaters that they never had before, to reach mainstream audiences that weren't just here, there, and everywhere, wherever the film might have played in the outskirts of town. Now you've got the potential that your film could make $1 million if the winds blow the right way. And so this was the sort of this rereading of a bunch of films that were not particularly well loved at the time necessarily, but have been looked at now as this sort of subgenre of so bad that it's good. Trash cinema, paracinema is another theoretical term that gets played around with. But what a lot of film fans and film scholars have been trying to do is just to simply point out that what some call bad, simply in a dismissive sort of way, others can reclaim them as perhaps working class cinema, or at least as this alternative to A, the mainstream, and B, high art cinema, in that, okay, you don't want to necessarily go in for the latest melodrama that's playing. You can perhaps go see a foreign film if you can get to it, or there's this gritty little film full of skeletons on the poster that is this other alternative to the mainstream that you have a chance to see, but it tends to get culturally dismissed as bad altogether, as a larger label that is usually dismissive, but that is really overlooking a whole bunch of economic and cultural perspectives.
Yeah, it's kind of like outsider art, in that sense. But as you pointed out, like it has for this window of time, this kind of utility to the industry in terms of filling screens. I like to, sort of differentiate between like bad filmmaking and quote bad filmmaking, because something like a truly bad film is nonsensical. Like when we're talking about the kind of bad as in so bad it's good film, it actually has to do enough right in order to hold your interest, and even what might be a little laughable about it still needs to have a kind of focal point. I mean, like if you're making an intentional comedy, the hardest thing to do is to get the entire audience to agree on what's funny. And oddly enough, a bad film finds a way to kind of do this maybe inadvertently, to something that we can all agree on so that we have a pleasure in collective recognition. And I think a thing about Teenagers from Outer Space that helps its legacy is that the things that are maybe kind of amusingly bad about it are actually like focal, as opposed to like just being incomprehensible is an entirely different problem. And if this film has faults, incomprehensibility is actually not one of them.
Absolutely.
It has the kind of clarity of like an old-fashioned movie serial. Like we will state our objectives, then we will get in the car and go there, and then we will discover a new objective and restate it, and then get in the car and go somewhere else. And the thing actually keeps moving in a kind of clear enough, path. I mean, it sounds like I'm damning this thing with faint praise, but it's also, I think, why there's an agreement on the bigger swings that kind of bubble to the surface, the skeletons and the Gargon, and even the kind of stilted, stylized, shall we say, dialogue itself, that actually kind of focuses on the comic badness as opposed to the incomprehensibility.
On the other side of it, you are being hypocritical if you are, oh, the skeletons are so terrible, because that's what you came in the door to see, as opposed to, oh, that's a poorly constructed film, which this is only at times. In other aspects, Graeff is quite competent with his editing and some of the cinematography. So it is unlike many other films, such as perhaps your Robot Monster or your Jerry Warren movies, whereby there is a lot structurally and formally that you can point to and say, this is poorly constructed cinema.
And also the characters are really likable. Like the hero and heroine, like they're likable people. We'll get to the plot in a short time, but let's focus on the filmmaker, because he has a very interesting, relatively short life. He's writing, directing, producing, editing, and starring as the kind of boyfriend of the main heroine in this, and who's a reporter. Let's talk a little bit about his life.
Yeah, he's, I mean, in the movie, a terrible reporter and terrible boyfriend. But he's a UCLA alum. And as Blair was pointing out, I mean, there's something that I honestly see in a lot of my own students and alumni is like, okay, nobody's picked me up yet, or I haven't kind of cracked the industry yet. Let me through kind of persuasion, and especially like with my friends, with people I care about, like, let me try to do a thing. Let me actually make something. You can't call yourself a writer unless you write. You can't call yourself a filmmaker unless you make films. So, I mean, there's sort of something very, admirable about that. So he borrows the money, as you said, from two friends of his who also appear in the film.
And so one of those is the main antagonist, right? Thor.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thor. Yeah. And then the woman who at the time was married to Thor and also put up the money was, I believe, the doctor's secretary, the woman with this sort of German accent. But they were, for a time, close friends of Graeff. And then there was a bit of fallout afterwards, in and around all this, who's getting paid and who's not getting paid type of thing. Graeff also, cast in this, and I think a rather charming and also, let's be honest, kind of familiar sort of way, his significant other, who's going by the pseudonym David Love, who stars in this as Derek. So there's something very sweet about that, like putting your boyfriend, putting your partner kind of front and center here, and trying to kind of get an audience to see in them what you see in them. I actually find it's one of the things that really works nicely about this movie. Like, David Love has this really enigmatic kind of wounded quality that makes him seem like a tender, sympathetic alien. But Graeff gets this made, and as Blair pointed out, has some challenges shopping this around. He eventually gets sued by his friends who haven't seen the money paid back. He undergoes a little bit of a mental breakdown. For a period of time, he declares himself the second coming of Jesus Christ. And there's a bit of a scandal there. And then, a couple other legal entanglements later in his career, and dies early, allegedly by suicide. So, not a kind of happy story all told. But in this moment, there's, I don't know, I feel like I can kind of tap into the hopefulness, the optimism, as Blair said, the kind of working class, like, hey, gang, let's not wait for someone to tell us we can make a movie. Let's go make a movie together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the lawsuit was between him and Thor, as I'm going to call him, and his wife. So Thor was Brian G. Pearson, who came from the UK and said, yep, sure, I'll produce it, but I want to be the main antagonist. And so they had a big falling out, which sounds really sad because apparently Tom Graeff used to sleep on their sofa. And then apparently Blair, he went and sued Allied Artists, right?
He did, yeah. He had originally been shopping to Allied Artists, who were, a fairly significant studio. They released Invasion of the Body Snatchers a few years earlier. Before, had a pretty decent track record with sci-fi movies. And they had even gone so far in 1958 as to advertise this film as part of their upcoming slate of releases with the title Invasion of the Gargons, one of the many titles that were attached to this film over the years. And in turn, it seemed that there wasn't quite a signature on the contract. But at the same time, Allied Artists had gone ahead anyways and decided to advertise this film. And so Graeff said that he was suing Allied Artists after the film had been released by Warner Brothers and didn't make the money that he had hoped in late 1959. And Graeff said, I had a deal for $60,000 flat fee for the film, plus a percentage of the profits that it would hopefully make but did not make. And in turn, when it fell through and Allied Artists did not end up releasing it by 1959, Graeff says, well, I had to then shop it around on the open market, and I took a loss for it. And instead, I only got $28,500 from Warner Brothers. And so Graeff is suing to make up the remaining $31,500 that he lost out on. And this was in the very end of 1959, when he is also starting to envision himself as the second coming of Jesus Christ. So it's tied up in a lot of the struggle and the fallout of the film, and it's just part of the personal story of Graeff that is really a tragic figure of an independent filmmaker who just didn't connect.
And apparently he kind of vanished for a while. Then he came back to Hollywood and got involved in editing a film. And then he liked taking adverts out. So he took an advert out saying that he was he was selling a script, or a script was selling for like $500,000. And that's when he was outed for his Jesus Christ II shenanigans, which were like a good 5-6 years earlier. And that's, I think, when everything turned south. And yeah, apparently that's when he committed suicide. So it's quite a tragic tale, because you hear about people who do these kind of wild stunts and they work out well for them. Okay, so let's go into this wonderful plot. And it's funny, actually, because the Mystery Science Theatre 3000, I hadn't heard of it before I started this podcast, and I started getting loads of people messaging me from the US, because it wasn't a thing in the UK, as far as I'm aware. And then I watched it, and it's so funny. So I would recommend anyone listening, if you watched it without the little voiceovers, I would recommend it. So can we talk a bit about the plot? And Mark, Derek, the protagonist.
Here's where I see, I mean, at least the intention and maybe even some ways the success, depending how you view it, of the teenagers of this all. I mean, as we pointed out, it's not literal teenagers, but it is aiming for something kind of like anti-authoritarian yet vulnerable. Derek is, he's a product of a very anonymous society. Certainly there's a kind of very totalitarian, we are we're the supreme race.
We are the supreme race. We have the supreme weapons. Keep him under guard, Thor. I will study the reactions of the young Gargon.
Nazi communist sort of allegorical stuff just in the soup there. But then, Derek is rebelling. He's, he's read enough. I love how he's got his tiny little book. I read this book. But, it's like he's read enough. He's exposed himself to knowledge. And now he feels that these values are corrupt, which is like, that's a very like generational thing,
Considering science fiction, you've got space fascists, which we have in pretty much every franchise I've just finished watching Andor. You've got like the rebellion of this thing. And the idea that they say, oh, I got this book which wasn't burnt by I don't know what the name they give of whoever the authority is, but that's again like a really old science fiction trope. So again, ticking all the boxes. People should watch this potentially with a bingo card so they can, have every single science fiction trope.
Or a drinking game, I suppose.
Yes.
But I mean, there's, there's a kind of I hate dad quality to this, like combined with the fact that he finds out that his dad is literally like the leader of the government and sort of shows up at the end.
Potentially, yeah.
Yes. Shows up at the end with a fake beard. I love how irresponsible. He's like, no, they won't notice I'm gone. It was like, won't they rebel? It's like, no, they won't even know. But like that tapping into that kind of like, I hate you, dad, like kind of quality of, just like a feeling of rebellion rather than, and again, I give this movie a bit of credit. Like, yes, it kind of vomits out a lot of its expositional backstory, but it also doesn't dwell there. It doesn't like spend all this time in kind of fantasy world mechanics. Like it gets pretty quickly to like bad laser gun, evil lobster, like it just like, so the actual kind of functional qualities of it aren't bad. And then the kind of underlying myth of it, as you pointed out, Aisha, is something that's, mythological, consistent, just like sort of you can really fill in out of your own viewing history, or really more importantly out of your own feelings, so to speak. So that sense of like, I am rebelling against the order I was raised in, and add in whatever you want, screw you dad and screw you space fascists. I think especially there's a lot of effort here, by the way, to contrast the imperious, militaristic space fascists against how almost alarmingly generous everyone in this small town is. I mean, it is this kind of like, you can obviously read it through the lens of a certain view of particularly white suburban Americanism, but this kind of, there is at least, let's just say, an artistic decision to contrast like the rigidity of the world he's coming from with like, hey, you want to ride? Hey, you want a room? Oh yeah, just go down the street. There's this like very like kind of idealistically American generosity that that Derek is coming up against and feeling himself being absorbed into, and that becomes actually, let's not forget, Derek's really in many ways the point of view character of this film. So, you often tend to associate there's like either a scientist or an innocent young woman or something like that who are under duress and have to stop the alien threat. In this case, it's actually the humanity of the alien that's kind of propelling the conflict within this movie versus the inhumanity of his, his antagonist in Thor.
Yeah. Blair, what do you think about Derek, who very quickly took out his ray gun on his superiors? That seemed very easy for him. He was ready for mutiny And he was ready to be a traitor very, very quickly.
And what I appreciate about what Graeff is doing with the teenage theme and the teenage rebellion subtext, which is obviously going to play well with the largely teenage audience, playing the drive-in movies that this was, and that was one of the core audiences, is that Graeff tapped into that exploitability of that type of teenage rebellion really before the wave had even hit. He started to write this film while he was working as the assistant to Roger Corman with a film called Not of This Earth, which they filmed in 1956. And so he said, well, I have a great idea for a science fiction story. And so you can look at this as, this is just a ripoff of I Was a Teenage Werewolf and the like. But he conceived of everything in this film narrative-wise and thematically before those movies had even come out. So he really is, tapping into that same motif of, James Dean and you don't understand me and you could never know the struggles that I'm going through. And in turn, he's attempting to do that of his own accord before, AIP, American International Pictures, gets there with, I Was a Teenage Werewolf and Teenage Frankenstein. So I appreciate that is what he is doing with, the simplicity of turning the ray gun on one's superiors.
And I also think you've mentioned Corman, and I watched Attack of the Crab Monsters. And sorry to Matt, who's one of the guests who recommended it, but I found it really difficult to get through. Whereas I do think, Corman's a huge name and he's done amazing things across his career, but I genuinely think this is a better film, even though Attack of the Crab Monsters did relatively well.
I would agree with you. And the idea is that Attack of the Crab Monsters, Corman's films were typically made for about 10 times what Graeff was working with as a budget. It's not 10 times better than Attack of the Crab Monsters, but it is certainly, as good or better a film on just a fraction of the budget.
And Blade also said that in regards to Graeff's personal life and his sexuality. So you've got the kind of like the alien outsider who's misunderstood. And of course, that applies to general rebellion and teenagers and all of those things. But it's also probably quite reflective of his life.
You could certainly read this as an allegory for Graeff's identity, Graeff's relationship. There isn't the room to be overt about that, but through these types of rereading strategies that I mentioned, you can go and apply, even if you want to use camp theory as a queer rereading strategy, as it has been used for, to try and look at why is this film so touching, perhaps, and it's really then because it is a reflection of Graeff himself.
Yeah, and Derek is not like a patriarchal butch kind of hero that's gonna he is heading into the world with a kind of an open heart and just wanting to get on. It's quite I can see that.
And he cares about animals too. He's an animal lover.
I have found evidence of intelligent beings on this planet.
Of what concern are foreign beings?
Of none to you, Thor. Just as you were so unconcerned when you destroyed the small creature. So bravely.
It was no more than an insect.
We first come to get to know him through is this quest to find Sparky's owner. He could have simply just let's move on with things, but he wants to do the right thing, so to speak, and track down the owner of this mysterious collar that he has.
Absolutely. Mark, can we talk a bit about the ray guns and the special effects of this film?
Oh, gladly.
And then we can move on to the Gargon.
Yes. Well, so yes, I mean the ray gun, effect. It's a cheap whatever dollar store, dime store, I suppose, toy ray gun. I find this very effective because he's using cinema to sell the thing. I mean, it's the same thing George Méliès was doing at the end of the 19th century, but it works. I mean, that's the right person to copy if you're trying to kind of get us to form an association between two cuts that has a fantastical illogic to it. So it's like, cut to human being, cut to ray gun firing at human being, cut back, and now a skeleton is where that human being is going to be. I mean, it's 1895 technology, in terms of filmmaking, but it is effective, and it has, as I pointed out, this kind of clarity and ultimately becomes part of the charm. The gun blasts from all of the police weapons are actually scratched onto the film stock, which again is just like a very old, very simple way of doing muzzle blasts from guns. It's just like you put a little scratch there, on a frame of film, and then that reads as a gun blast. And, getting around the problem of noisy onset sound recording by pre-recording, not all, but a substantial portion of the dialogue, and then running it as playback for the actors to talk back to. I mean, look, musicals have been doing this since the dawn of sound. Orson Welles would do this as well from time to time, which is not to get lofty about it, but just to say, like, this is someone who understands that if I spend a little bit extra time or have a little bit extra inconvenience up front, it's going to save me a lot of time and money after the fact. It's like when you have a couple of decisions that kind of go together, like it work, like, the sort of stilted, very like pronouncement over enunciated refusal to use contractions. Yeah. We don't ever use contractions from outer space. That's the one thing we haven't discovered, that like that way of speaking. Look, that actually you can do that very easily with this pre-recorded dialogue, because then you have something with a kind of, a real metronomic, predictable, mannerism too, like how Derek starts to, kind of the sort of moral straw that broke Derek's back in the lead up to his mutiny. Like that's all told silently through like point of view and reaction. And then you have a suspense scene like the at the doctor's office where the doctor's removing bullets from Thor, and Thor is holding everyone at gunpoint, which that's just like a good scene foundation. That's like a good suspense scene foundation, and he knows how to do it. He builds up a rhythm through cutting. He uses this, POV through Thor's eyes, slightly out of focus, handheld. I mean, these are decisions to kind of make, using what you have at your disposal, which is to say cinema, to overcome the fact that, maybe you don't have the best stuff in terms of properties and actors, and all this stuff. Like he's actually directing scenes pretty well. He's not, as you pointed out, Aisha, he's not overreaching necessarily, unless you really want to talk about the Gargon, I suppose.
I think we will talk about the Gargon. I love the fact that when you're talking, I can see Blair just nodding along. You guys are both definitely big fans of this film.
I loved as well, there's this final moment where Betty's on the phone to the power company to try and boost more power. We need more power, Captain. And Graeff places the camera behind the levers that the technician then goes and starts pulling. So as he's on the phone, he's in the background or in the middle ground, but then he then turns and moves to try and turn the lever up higher, and his hand then reaches forward into the foreground. And so it's a simple little scene, but it could have been much more blandly executed. And so in turn, Graeff knows where to place his camera to sort of build up the suspense and the tension by creating something that is, on par with, other directors that were making higher budget films of the time.
Yeah, good use of foreground elements. He's got a sense of composition here. And it's sort of like what we were saying before, like a truly bad film actually doesn't know where to guide your eye, as Blair was saying. And like, this, look, we don't want to sort of overestimate this movie. It's a masterpiece. Yeah. It is, to be clear, not without its flaws. I would actually watch this instead of Oppenheimer. But twice. In fact, you would have time to watch this twice instead of Oppenheimer.
Okay. I'll talk to you about Oppenheimer.
We can do that later. Yeah.
I think there's disappointment there. Yes. Okay, let's talk about the Gargon, which is a lobster.
Yeah.
And I love the fact they set it up, and it's Chekov's Gargon at the beginning, because they're like, look at this little lobster in this little box. We'll be getting back to that, because this is obviously a very dangerous creature.
At the rate the Gargon is expected to grow, what will prevent it from tearing loose the leg bands and escaping from the cave?
We shall be back before that happens, unless it should receive food in excess of the atmospheric elements. We will leave nothing else for it to consume.
Imagine thousands of beasts like that, millions of times enlarged, roaming over this planet.
Did they choose lobsters because they were just really easy to get at the fish market in the morning? Like, what do you think's behind that?
Lobsters already look like alien creatures on Earth. Their skeleton is on the outside. So there's this, it's like, if you're thinking about like, what's a thing that I can kind of get my hands on that like nature has already designed to look alien, you're looking at your arthropods, you're going in that direction. And as you said, like a lobster is not, outlandishly hard to come by. It is something that has, as delicious as it may be, you don't want to pet a lobster. You don't want to cuddle a lobster. It has, I think, to some folks, the same kind of creepy quality that like a large spider would, or the ants in them or something like that. So, there's a kind of like, when you're talking about kind of how to find a monster, you're always trying to find something that has an inherently revulsive quality to it. And then the kind of the added point is, and let's make it giant. It's like, I may not want to pick up a lobster, but I'm not like afraid of a lobster, especially in that weird little cage they keep it in. But, if I ran into like a 50-foot tall lobster, like then I am alarmed.
Or one that was just very close to the camera.
Very close to the camera. Yeah, exactly. And if there's one decision for me that kind of like is, that's actually like a bad filmmaking decision that contributes disproportionately to my joy, it is the sound that the Gargon makes. It's like, it's one of those things where like if you're in post-production with Tom Graeff, you'd be like, Tom, buddy, this sound is not working. Like, find anything else. But like there's an odd bit of charm in just the immediacy of the decisions being made.
One of the big appeals for me watching it is that it feels like the plot of the film is a bit like the games I used to play as a child. So it does have a kind of pacey, fun quality to it.
And then Dad comes and ruins everything at the end. Game over, kids.
Yeah. Grandpa's asleep on the couch the entire time. Yes. But to your point, Aisha, this is why I kind of compared it to like a movie serial. And again, like if we want to
it's got flashes of Flash Gordon.
Flashes of Flash.
Say it's not purposefully funny, but the bit where he goes in for the room.
It's just that I never knew any brothers or sisters.
Your mother and father decided to play it smart and avoid a lot of squabbles around the house.
Oh, Grandpa.
I never knew my mother or father.
Well, let's take a look at the room, and if you like it, you're welcome to stay.
Oh, right, let's take you to the room. Like, it's just a socially awkward, like, he's like, let's change this subject. This has gotten really unnecessarily heavy. But I think Graeff is very aware. It's a teen audience. He knows the boxes to tick. He's got the ray gun. He's got the spaceship. When he goes there, you've got Betty opens the door. She's very pretty and immediately starts talking about how she's going to be in a swimsuit later in the film.
You show it to him, will you? Joe'll be by for me in a minute. We're going swimming at Alice's and I haven't even changed yet. Well, come on in.
So if you were thinking of leaving and you're a teen boy, you'll be like, oh, maybe I'll stay for that.
Her friend, really coming in hot there in the swimming pool. She's never seen out of the swimming pool.
Yeah. She lives and dies in there, as far as we're concerned. But yeah, I really, really like her friend is fantastic.
Well, hello. What can I do for you?
You are alone?
Could be.
Where are the others? The ones who were with you?
Why do you want to know that?
Tell me where they are.
Say, who are you anyway?
Never mind. Just tell me.
Well, they left here. They're gone.
Where did they go?
I think you better get out of here before I call the police.
You will call no one. You will do as I say.
That's what you think, mister.
I said you will call no one.
It's got that cliche of, she's the fast woman or the kind of, sexually promiscuous woman who ends up dying, because that seems to be what happens to girls like that. But also she's got so much she seems really fun and really flirtatious and really like happy in herself and has some agency. So I kind of like that about her.
Mm-hmm.
They even talk about mineshaft, which I'm like, there's another cliche of ticking every single possible box that we can.
Well, I do think part of that is like this is a movie that fits into the history of B movies produced in this area, in using Bronson Canyon, which I mean I'm sure Blair has seen more times than he could probably count.
It's the same cave from Robot Monster.
Robot Monster, yeah. So I mean that kind of thing is like, how do we've got this canyon we can use, we've got this cave we can use, so let's invent a mine shaft.
And I imagine, you could even the two film crews bumping into each other. No, we're shooting here today.
Yeah, so we'll trade you a ray gun for
Okay, let's talk about Thor.
Hey, what's going on in town anyway, mister? A convention or something?
What?
Well, those clothes you're wearing. I talked to a guy this morning who was wearing the same kind of outfit.
Maybe the guy you're looking for, huh?
You spoke to him? What did he tell you? Where did he go?
Hey, what's the matter with you? Hey, take your hands off me.
You will tell me what he said to you.
Oh, why should I? Hey, who do you think you are, anyway?
Answer me, or I destroy you.
Again, such a comical character, because he's just so, adamantly a fascist and mean, and he speaks at a continuously and necessarily mean way all the way through, kills people left, right, and centre. He's quite entertaining.
He is. And I in my mind picture that's just who he is. That's Brian Pearson, and he's not acting. I just imagine him going to a diner and demanding, give me a ham steak and french fried potatoes now.
And he shoots people to turn them into skeletons. Yeah. It's a fantastic role, I think, for him. And also the bit where he's on the that doctor really doesn't care about that nurse one bit, because he's like, well, leave him here. He should know that the nurse is coming. But he's probably like, never liked her anyway. Let's get rid of her.
But, this is, I mean, again, like speaking about Thor pretty functionally, I mean, having this secondary line of action, I mean, this is like, they create some amount of suspense that this isn't just like a fish out of water comedy and then we're waiting for the Gargon to get big. Like, Thor does add this kind of antagonistic pressure and an ability to like cut back and forth. And now you've got another way to vary the location. Like first it's, Derek and Betty at the location. And then one scene later, Thor shows up at the location. And the contrast is basic and, and overt in that way.
It's much like the some of the structure of the Terminator.
I was just going to say, or the new Megan movie. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, he goes off and stalks and kills while we get the adventures of Derek and Betty.
Yeah, it is a bit like Terminator. I wonder if
Terminator 2, really, right? I mean, wouldn't that be more it? Because you've got the kind of the outsider who then has to stop the other outsider because he's sort of recognized the value of. I think it's more Terminator 2.
Okay. I think we can.
Maybe I'm wrong though. Anyway,
I think they're both
Again, we're giving this movie probably far more credit than it deserves.
It's a masterpiece.
It's 1959's Terminator 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the ending of the film, because you're trying to appeal to teens. Surely they just want Derek to live happily ever after on Earth, but that is not what happens.
So the ending is where you really notice that he doesn't have the budget to pull off the scope of his story with the invading fleet, and all we see are these reaction shots of people looking up in the sky, and there's a whole lot of stock footage, and he has to use this explosion footage. I think it's a volcano erupting that replaces the actual explosion, and so it's climactic and literally explosive. And so as far as how a sci-fi movie should end, the idea of an alien invading fleet that gets destroyed, and Derek is the one that sacrifices himself for the fate of his newly acquired home planet. That's appropriately tragic and spectacular. It's just that Graeff lacks the money to be able to pull that off in a relatively convincing way. And on a narrative level, it is that sort of self-sacrifice that it makes the film all the more poignant, dare I say, if we're trying to praise this film as a masterpiece, which we can bang that drum. It is, I think, not a happy ending, and that sort of adds just a little bit more to the film.
It sort of boils down to like, teen stands up to dad and becomes a hero. But then you get that poignant his head in the sky at the end, which again is like a lovely, I mean, again, that you're talking about underscoring the kind of the messianic quality of it all, from the guy who brought you Jesus Christ 2 comes, sacrificial alien boy head in the sky. It's also kind of romantic as well, again, considering, that they were romantically entangled, but, trying to kind of get to something, a power of love that's even greater than the most advanced extraterrestrial civilization is the kind of respect for human life and generous American values that Derek is helping to sustain.
I feel they need to have a sequel to find out what happened on their home planet, because they lost this random ship. They don't have somewhere for these Gargons to grow, and then their leader just disappeared. So yeah, we could.
And it contributes to the anti-fascist theme in that at the end of the film they're talking about the book and the power of forbidden knowledge, and Derek points out that these books are starting to spread around the planet, and I'm not the only one who is beginning to become awake to the wrongs of the way things happen. And so Derek decides to be the spark that lights the fire, so to speak, and sacrifices himself. And indeed we might in a sequel have learned about the repercussions of that back in the home planet as the word starts to spread.
The Teenagers from Outer Space expanded universe. I'm very excited for this.
I do tend to like to look at where a lot of the main actors went, but King Moody is the only one who had a significant TV career, and then he was so King Moody is the guy who is the kind of evil
captain.
Fascist captain, that's right, who comes over, and he was Ronald McDonald for many years. Which is quite funny.
Speaking of your corporate overlords, yes.
Yeah. And the one which I think in MST3K they keep going torture, because he says it in a really fantastically hammy way during the film. Okay, recommendations for the listener. Mark.
I think this was inspired by this movie, but I am a fan of the Misfits song Teenagers from Mars. You do have to be kind of a sicko to like the Misfits. Unfortunately, I am. But just in terms of kind of channeling this era of filmmaking through, a kind of grimy punk rock lens, I can't watch this movie without thinking of Teenagers from Mars.
Okay. Blair.
I think as a counterpoint to this film, if you want to look at what it was up against at the box office, you should look at I Was a Teenage Werewolf to see how the same types of themes were handled on 10 times the budget, but still within a B-movie context. But after that, I think you should grab your vinyl LPs from the 90s surf rock band Man or Astro Man, who always had sci-fi oriented songs and used actual clips of dialogue at the beginning and end from a lot of 1950s and 60s B movies. Man or Astro Man will put you in the mood for this film 100%.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to talk briefly, if you're talking music, apparently stock music in this film was also used in The Night of the Living Dead. That's a nice little fun fact to end on. Thank you so much to both of you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Aisha.
Thank you.
Wonderful. That's it for this episode. Next episode, we will be talking about the 1959 film The Tingler, which is a sci-fi horror starring Vincent Price. I will leave details in the show notes on how you can watch that so you can join us. Thank you so much to everyone who is supporting the show, either by listening or by sharing, leaving reviews, and to my Patreon members, which has been very exciting. I know a lot of podcasts tend to name their patrons on the show, but I'm not sure if I'd genuinely like that. So if you do want to be mentioned on the show, and I am utterly grateful for your support, please let me know by sending me a message on Patreon, and I'll be sure to name you out next time. Thank you so much to all of you again, and I'll see you again next time.
It's a masterpiece!